our last seminar of the semester and the fourth seminar of our Pioneers in Psychology series with Professor Dr. Robert Sternberg. Professor Sternberg, thank you so much for being here today. It's an honor to have you. And we're really looking forward to hear about your comments on the Western conception of intelligence. We're very excited. If you want to get G points, make sure you write your name, surname, and ID in the chat. If you have questions about the seminar, you can ask them at the end by unmuting yourself, read them out loud. Emir is our moderator today, and now he will read the biography of our speaker.
Hello and welcome, Professor, again. So I'll be reading your bio for today. Professor Dr. Robert J. Sternberg has a BA from Yale University and PhD from Stanford University. He holds 13 honorary doctorates from 11 countries. He has won more than 24 awards for his work, and he is the author of over 1,800 publications. Some of his significant contributions to psychology are triatric theory of intelligence, triangular theory of love, and several influential theories related to creativity, wisdom, thinking styles, hate, and leadership. He was cited in an APA Monitor on Psychology report as one of the top 100 psychologists of the 20th century, and in a report in Archives of Scientific Psychology by Diner and colleagues as one of the top 200 psychologists of modern era. He is currently working as a professor of psychology in College of Human Ecology at Cornell University and honorary professor of psychology at Heidelberg University, Germany. Professor, welcome again. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Just 1 second. Let's see if this works here. Okay. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Yes? All right. So then I'm going to turn this to this, and let's get started. Thank you very much for having me today. I've only been to Turkey once, to Istanbul, and I wish I were there today instead of here in Ithaca, New York. But maybe in the future there will be a chance for me to visit in person rather than by computer. So thanks again for having me. The title of the talk today is Time Bomb: How the Western Conception of Intelligence is Taking Down Humanity. So the main message of the talk is that the Western conception of intelligence has been and continues to be a disaster. It's taking down humanity. We can do better and implement a conception of intelligence that points to a better future, not a much worse future for humanity. Please note that this talk presents my own opinions on humanitarian crises, which you are welcome to share or not share as you wish. And some of you may share my views, others may share fewer of them. The talk is loosely based on a book I wrote called Adaptive Intelligence: Surviving and Thriving in Times of Uncertainty, which was published in 2021 by Cambridge University Press. So let's get started. First question is, what is this? Do you know what this is? It's a Norwegian lemming. So if you learn nothing else today, you now know what a Norwegian lemming looks like. What is this? It is a picture of lemmings committing mass suicide. So you can see the lemmings jumping off the cliff into the water. And one of them feels like something's wrong, but the one who feels like something's wrong is being told, "Shut up, you moron. Do as you've been told. It's for your own good." The pictures, however, are fakes. Lemmings do not commit mass suicide. The only reason people think they do is that there was a Walt Disney movie that faked pictures of lemmings committing suicide. In fact, as you can see, they're having jumps and they're being evaluated for their jumps. And this lemming is actually doing very good jumps. All the ratings are 8s and 9s. Well, in fact, only one species, not lemmings, is known to commit mass suicide, and that's humans. Humans are waging a war on nature. UN chief Antonio Guterres said, "Our planet is broken." The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, warned on Wednesday, December 2nd, 2020. Humanity is waging what he described as a suicidal war on the natural world. Nature always strikes back and is doing so with gathering force and fury, he told the BBC special event on the environment. The UN has warned that Earth is sleepwalking to climate catastrophe. This was on March 21st, 2022. The problem is getting worse, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said this morning. He added that the goals world leaders agreed to limit global warming are on life support. Worse, humanity is financing its own extinction. The world spends $1.8 trillion a year on subsidies that harm the environment, a study found. I mean, how crazy is that? $1.8 trillion to ruin the environment. Research prompts warnings that humanity is financing its own extinction through subsidies damaging to the climate and wildlife. We don't only commit mass suicide through climate change. There are weapons of war. This is a nuclear bomb explosion in Hiroshima, courtesy of the United States. These are victims of poison gas attacks in Iraq. This is also a U.S. production, a napalm girl from the Vietnam War. Things have not gotten better. This is destruction during a recent conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. This is the upshot of a terrorist attack in Baghdad. This is the Russian invasion of Ukraine 2022. Totally a manufactured crisis, utterly phony. Evil did not die after World War II. It is going on right now. As I am speaking, people are dying for absolutely nothing. And that's what we call an intelligent species. Malignantly narcissistic leaders continue to wreak havoc on the world. Intelligence used badly through the dark triad of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. This is air pollution in Beijing. This is not fog. This is Ella from London, UK. Her death certificate states air pollution as her cause of death. These are oil spills, fish that are contaminated by the spills. This is an industrial accident after a methyl isocyanate gas explosion at Bhopal, India. These are victims of climate change in Alaska and California, USA. It's no joke. My family and I were in California during the fires, and instead of having a fun vacation, we spent much of our time trying to dodge wildfires. Overuse of antibiotics is killing people. And now there's a countdown. In 2017, author Shauna Swan and her team of researchers completed a major study. They found that over the past 4 decades, sperm levels among men in Western countries have dropped by more than 50%. They came to this conclusion after examining 185 studies involving close to 45,000 healthy men. You can interpret the study in various ways, but the data are what they are. This is what I mean by literally financing our own extinction. This is a mob assault on the U.S. Capitol building, January 6, 2021. 5 people died. And you could ask, what do all these disasters have in common? And notice they're in countries all over the world. It's not that it's this country or that country or the other country. It's almost everywhere. I would argue that the disasters are a result, directly or indirectly, of intelligence as conceptualized in the West. High IQ has its advantages. It enables us to do well on IQ tests and other general intelligence or G-based tests. It enables some of us to set the alarm on hotel alarm clocks. I can't do the one at the right. I'm sort of still at the one at the left level. And IQ predicts lots of shorter and long-term individual successes. But even long-term success for the individual is short-term for humanity. It has produced what is sometimes called a tragedy of the commons. The idea is, if you go back to New England in colonial times, the 1700s, there used to be a common green, and farmers would graze their cattle on the green. The smart thing for each individual farmer to do was to have the cattle graze as much as possible because it fattens the cattle and makes them worth more. But if one or more users increase the commons beyond its carrying capacity, if they have too much cattle, and if each farmer is trying to maximize his or her, but usually his own gain, then eventually there's no grass left. So by maximizing individual gain, everybody loses. There's a tragedy of the commons. And, one of the nice things that I remember about Istanbul is the traffic jams. Maybe it's gotten better. I have no idea. But we have plenty of traffic jams in the United States. And in a traffic jam, each driver may be saying, if these idiots would just take the bus, I would be home by now. So each individual tries to maximize his or her individual success, including on IQ tests, but that often leads to long-term adverse collective consequences. As individuals try to maximize, the commonweal minimizes. Each individual's success sometimes has brought humanity and many other species closer to collapse. Moreover, conventional general intelligence-based tests, although standardized, are not fair to everyone of any species. So this is a cartoon for a fair selection. Everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And that may seem silly, except when we give IQ tests, metaphorically, we're doing something very similar. We're assuming that everyone who comes in to take the test has had equal advantages in being prepared for the test, and that, of course, is untrue. Some people believe that things are getting better, much better. Let me go back a slide here. But it's not clear. Steven Pinker is always talking about how things are getting better, but I'm not so sure that they're getting better because the problem is not just today, tomorrow, or the next day, but over the long term for our children and grandchildren. So when people, like it's easy for a Harvard professor to say things are getting better. They probably are for Harvard professors and for people in the upper classes. They tend to do well almost, at least in many countries, without regard to what's going on in the rest of the world. COVID comes, their income goes up. COVID goes, their income goes up. Stock market crashes, they've been selling short, their income goes up. But if you look at the collective outcomes for everybody, they're not good. And that's starting right now. The fires, the hurricanes, the typhoons, the parched earth, that's not future, that's now. The founders of the testing movement had a well-intentioned goal to create a meritocracy rather than a plutocracy. When I was in Turkey, I asked somebody, and it may be different today. I was told at the time that they relied very heavily on test scores, standard test scores. And I asked why, and they said it's because if they don't, then what will happen is people will get ahead by pull. That in the absence of test scores, it'll be about how much social power you have, about your socioeconomic class, how much money you have, how many political connections you have. So the testers wanted to get rid of that. They wanted to create a meritocracy rather than a plutocracy based on money. What they could not know at the beginning of the 20th century was how highly test scores and socioeconomic status would correlate and become intertwined. So this graph shows a squared multiple correlation of 0.95 between income levels and mean test scores. This is for the SAT. So clearly, in saying you're replacing plutocracy or money or social connections with merit, what you're really doing is laundering social connections. You're giving them a nicer name. It's not that they're the same, but the correlation is very high. It's not perfect, but it's very high. Now, you could blame the testing companies, you could blame schools, you could blame them, you could blame the other ones, you could blame somebody else, but we're all responsible for the current state of testing, all of us. Society can perpetuate the existing socioeconomic class structure and call it meritocracy. So some people, as in the cartoon, are born with all kinds of advantages. They're closer to success, and then they imagine it's their merit that got them where they are. If you take, for example, the Trump children, who, whatever strengths they may have, intellectual heft doesn't seem to be one of them, neither to me does it seem to be integrity. They started way up on the scale to success. And Hunter Biden, it's the same. Joe Biden's kid has been taking advantage of his father's social connections for years. So it's not about one political party or another. So we have this appearance of meritocracy, but it's very thin. So what do all these tests and what do Western conceptions of intelligence have in common? What are they missing? What's missing here? And so I've been talking about what's wrong. Now I'd like to talk about what we could do better. What they miss is what's most important to the world today. I'm trying to get this little band out of here, but and that is that we want people to be intelligent in the true sense of adapting to the environment rather than destroying the environment themselves in the process. And that's what so much of the world is doing. I mean, in some places it's revolting, like in Brazil, where there's a president who's purposely doing his best to destroy the environment. And in other places, efforts are being made to preserve the environment, but they're very half-hearted because economic interests are prioritized. We have a choice. So I've proposed a model that I call active concerned citizenship and ethical leadership. And what I've argued is that we need to get away from how much money your parents make or how politically connected they are or what party they belong to or what their religion or their ideology is. We need to get away from IQ or proxy measures of IQ and look at creativity, common sense, wisdom, and certain kinds of analytical abilities that I'll talk about. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. And what I want to make sure I add is that the elements in my theory are not new. They're already included in many Eastern and indigenous conceptions of intelligence. So, for example, the rural Kenyan conception of intelligence includes Rieko, which is knowledge, abilities, and skills. It's very similar to general intelligence, analytical skills. Luro, which is similar to practical intelligence. Paro, which is similar to creativity. And Winjo, which is similar to wisdom. So indigenous people, I would argue, are well ahead of narrow psychologists in understanding intelligence, but expertise always comes at a cost. And the cost of expertise in the field of intelligence is people get so used to doing what the last generation did and the generation before that, that in 2022, we are still using tests that are not dissimilar, that are actually quite similar to those used by Charles Spearman in 1904 and Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon in 1905. And that, in a way, is kind of sad. If you thought about medical testing, and if medical testing in 2022, like for cancer or AIDS or COVID-19, were the same as what we had at the beginning of the 20th century, that would not be where we want to be. So let's start talking about creativity. Creativity is generating new ideas and products that are novel and useful. And here's some examples of measures we have used in our research. Design a scientific experiment on a topic of your choice. Draw a picture of the beginning of time. Or suppose the Nazis had won World War II. What would the world be like today? Or write a creative story using the title Social Media Died Today. Or draw an advertisement for a new brand of bow tie, or create an exciting slogan for your school, or create a new game. So what we're trying to do is get away from pedestrian kinds of tasks. Here's an example of a creative essay we got when I was Dean of Arts and Sciences at Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts. And this was an actual admissions essay used for admission to Tufts. If the Trojans had heeded Laocoon's advice and thrown Odysseus's wooden horse into the sea, they would have defeated the Greeks at Troy. Aeneas would then never have had reason to flee the city, and he would never have ventured to Italy to found Rome. Without Rome, neither the Roman Republic nor a Roman Empire would have existed. Concrete, the arch, plumbing, and the sauna might never have been invented. The modern implications of Rome never having existed are indeed drastic. Lacking even concrete floors, people would resort to sleeping in the mud, and without plumbing or saunas, they would be perpetually filthy and generally quite chilly. France could not have built the base of the Eiffel Tower without arches, so tourists would be unable to purchase miniature collectible towers in Parisian convenience stores. So this is an essay we judged as very creative, and it was written by someone whose verbal test score was not particularly high. So what I'm saying is that the traditional verbal tests miss important aspects of verbal creativity. What we found in the Rainbow Study, which we conducted in my last years at Yale University as a professor, is that adding creative measures to a college admissions device, and this was a study that was done around, when I say college, I mean university. You use the term college differently. University, undergraduate university admissions device. Adding measures of creativity doubled prediction of first-year grade point average relative to the standardized test frequently used in the United States for university admissions called the SAT. So adding creative tests doubled prediction. And adding the creative measures greatly decreased ethnic group and racial differences. So the red bars are the SAT, the standard measure, and the green bars and the blue bars are our own measures. In this study, we did not eliminate ethnic and racial differences, but we did reduce them substantially. So I talked about creativity. Let's talk now about common sense. And this is a cartoon called Dilbert. It starts with a job interviewer saying, wow, you have 3 master's degrees and a PhD. Yes, it's all very impressive, but interestingly, I have no common sense whatsoever. That's not the sort of thing you should say during a job interview. I don't see why not. So this is an example of a job candidate who has apparently a high IQ, but very little common sense. Common sense or practical intelligence is using your knowledge and skills effectively to adapt to, shape, and select environments. In other words, to change yourself to fit the environment, that's adaptation, to change the environment to fit you, which is shaping, and selection is to get out of the environment you're in and say, I'm just in the wrong place. Wrong school, wrong relationship, wrong community, wrong job, whatever. Here's some measures we've used to measure practical intelligence. How would you persuade a friend to adopt an idea of yours that he initially did not like? Or they might see a movie of students trying to get a mattress up a winding staircase to the second floor, but they're unable to get it up. In the movie you just saw, how can the students get the mattress to the second floor, given that it does not fit up the winding staircase? Or in another movie, in the movie you just saw, what should the student do, given that the professor from whom she wants a letter of recommendation obviously does not recognize her? So a girl asks for a letter of recommendation. The professor didn't know who she is. What should she do? Or which of the following strategies would you use to study for an essay test? Or is the romantic couple real or fake? So we would show romantic couples. Half of them were real couples. Half were posed to be real couples, but were fakes. And you had to say which was which. And what we found is that measuring practical skills also increased prediction by about 25% of first-year grade point average. Practical intelligence matters everywhere. Here are honey gatherers searching for beehives. And that may seem like an obscure job to you, but for them, it's a living. And so for them, practical intelligence of a kind we probably don't have is what enables them to survive. This is from a project we did in Canyon Practical Intelligence. This is the school, so you can see the school looked very different from what we may be used to. And here's a problem. A small child in your family has homa. She has a sore throat, headache, and fever. She's been sick for 3 days. Which of the following 5 yod naya luo can treat homa? So the idea is that if you look at this problem, you won't be able to answer except at chance, but these kids do quite well. In other words, if you talk about practical intelligence or common sense, it always depends on the context in which you live. Having practical intelligence in Ukraine, a city being bombed today, is different from practical intelligence wherever you live. Now, some people have thought that these kinds of problems are kind of, limited in scope to less developed cultures, but I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has shown how wrong it is, because there are many people with high IQs who have taken very few measures to protect themselves, and 6 million people have died. So clearly, whatever our IQs may be, something's missing in terms of the adaptive intelligence of the world to deal with the problem. These are scores on our practical intelligence tests, like that one about natural herbal medicines. And you'll notice in the first column that all of the correlations between the practical intelligence test measures and IQ test measures are negative, which is contrary to the prediction of Spearman's theory of general intelligence. Now, you may ask, well, how is that possible? And the answer is simple, that in many cultures, probably yours, I can't say for sure, more education is considered a sign that you're smarter. But in some cultures, it's reversed. In rural Kenyan culture, there's not much you can do with academic school education. So what happens is the smart kids are taken out of school to become apprentices, to learn to do something that will make them money. The not so smart kids, at least by common perception, are left in school because no one wants them as apprentices. So they get higher test scores, but on tests that are negatively related to adaptive skill in the environment. This is a project we did in Alaska. This is a fishing village in rural Alaska that you can reach only by airplane. And in the winter, it's almost impossible to reach. It's very hard to get there because of the weather. And here's a problem. When Eddie runs to collect ptarmigan that he's just shot, he notices that its front pouch, the balloon, is full of ptarmigan food. This is a sign that there's a storm on the way. Winter is almost over. It's hard to find food this season, or it hasn't snowed in a long time. Again, most of us would get none right except by chance on this test. But for the kids living in this environment, this is a good test. These kids, who their teachers consider dumb, stupid, are kids who can navigate in the frozen tundra for 50 or even 100 miles without any obvious cues, and they can go from one village to another. If the teachers who thought they're stupid, who are from the cities, tried to do that navigation, they would die. So what's smart depends on the context you're in. And what the graphs show is that the rural kids did better on the practical intelligence test, the urban kids on the academic intelligence test. My point is that we have this narrow notion of intelligence about school grades and test scores, and it doesn't do justice at all to the complexities of the environments in which we live. My general point is that common sense is not the same as IQ. One can be high in both or low in both, but also high in one and low in the other. And anyone who has spent any time in academia should know that there are plenty of people in academia who are high in IQ, but very low in practical intelligence. Maybe it's not that way in Turkey, it is in the United States. Now let's talk about wisdom. Wisdom is using your knowledge and skills toward a common good by balancing your own, others, and larger interests over the long as well as the short term through the infusion of positive ethical values. These are some wisdom problems we've used. Kor and Tamlin are two countries in the Middle East. They're having a serious clash. The Taron River flows in the direction from Kor to Tamlin. Tamlin claims that Kor is diverting more than its fair share of the water from the river. It is getting ready to go to war over this precious water resource. What should the two countries do? Another problem, give an example of how some passion you have in your life now could be turned for a common good when you grow older. Another problem. Richard and Jennifer broke up. They both left you text messages that they want to talk to you about regarding what happened. You know they both will want you to take their side. What should you do? We used a project at Tufts called the Kaleidoscope Project, and I'm not going to go into the details, but what we found is that when we used measures such as these for university admissions, We admitted students who were creative, practically intelligent, and wise, who would not have been admitted had we relied just on the conventional grades and tests. And then I used to think that standardized tests at least were good for measuring analytical skills, but they're not even that great for that. So at Cornell, we've been doing some studies on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math reasoning. And the question we asked is whether STEM reasoning is the same as what is measured by domain general IQ proxies, or is it more domain specific? Here's some of the problems we've used. Marie, this is proposing alternative hypothesis. Marie is interested in child development. One day she notices that whenever Laura's nanny comes in to pick up Laura from nursery school, Laura starts to cry. Marie reflects how sad it is that Laura has a poor relationship with her nanny. What are some alternative hypotheses regarding why Laura starts to cry when she is picked up from nursery school by the nanny? This is a test on designing experiments. Ella, a senior in college, observes that her roommate tends to perform better on an exam if she's had a cup of coffee beforehand. Ella hypothesizes that drinking coffee before taking an exam will significantly increase one's exam performance. However, Ella does not know how to test this hypothesis. Tell her how to test it. And here's one more, assessing the validity of conclusions. Bill was interested in how well a new program for improving mathematical performance worked. He gave 200 students a pre-test on their mathematical knowledge and skills. He then administered the new program to them. After administering the program, he gave the same 200 students a post-test that was equal in difficulty and in all relevant ways comparable to the pre-test. He found that students improved significantly in performance from pre-test to post-test. He concluded that the program for improving mathematical performance was effective. Is this conclusion correct? Why or why not? And the answer is no, because there's no control group. They could have improved for any reason. So the three main findings were the three tests of scientific reasoning correlated positively and factored with each other. Tests of fluid abilities or general intelligence also correlated with each other. But the tests of scientific reasoning showed trivial or in some cases negative correlations with the fluid ability measures. In other words, the IQ tests were not good measures of scientific reasoning. Scientific reasoning appears to be different from whatever it is that standardized tests measure, and those tests may provide incomplete and possibly misleading results for admission to STEM programs. So I've talked about creativity, analytical intelligence, practical intelligence, wisdom. Other things matter too: intrinsic motivation, mindset, passion for making a difference, active citizenship, specific talents, emotional intelligence, rational thinking, critical thinking. I mean, there's a lot that matters. I'm not saying that this is all, but my point is that conventional tests don't cut it. Standardized tests based on modern Western notions of intelligence are seriously limited and narrow because modern Western notions of intelligence are seriously limited and narrow. There are available at least prototypes of tests that could expand our conceptions and our measurements. Why don't we use them? And there are lots of reasons. Entrenchment, we're used to doing things the same way. Intellectual laziness, we don't want to bother. Short-term thinking, we only think about grades, not about long-term outcomes. Desire to preserve the socioeconomic hierarchy we already have. The quantitative precision fallacy, that we think if they're numbers, they must be valid. The similarity fallacy, which is that people look for others like themselves. Universities use test scores for public relations. The tests are free to the universities, and even superstition. Just knowing that the test might work because we just know it. The Western conception of intelligence values people who are very good at doing what they're told and fitting into an existing cognitive, social, socioeconomic structure. Even creative professions often value those who are creative working within entrenched paradigms and who do not challenge the existing structure of the field. People who are highly creative or wise do not fit well into this structure and are challenged at every turn to stay in their place. So little changes because the existing power structure, which is often hidden, does not allow it to change. And that spells a dismal future. We're running out of time. The problems facing the world are enormous, and behavioral scientists often have reacted as though these problems are not their problem. They've persisted, especially in the field of intelligence and related fields, in defining problems narrowly, failing to realize that if the world falls apart, there won't be a next generation to continue smaller, self-satisfied approaches to small problems, much less small approaches to big problems. This is South Beach, Miami, Florida today. It's very nice. Here's a projected look at South Beach, Miami, Florida in the future. It's not so nice. It's time to realize that merely smart people won't save the beach. It's going to be overrun by water. They won't save the country and they won't save the world. We need also to develop skills that matter more, such as creativity, common sense, and wisdom. And climate change experts have issued what amounts to a last chance warning. Louisiana, a state in the south of the United States, loses a football field's worth of land every hour and a half. Now engineers are in a race to prevent it from sinking into oblivion. This is what a map of Louisiana looks like, if you look in a book. This is what Louisiana now really looks like. It's disappearing under the water. We're running the wrong race. At least one black sheep lemming has figured out the right race to run. So can we. We can't keep running this idiotic race that maximizes individual gains and produces collective losses. We need to stop being transactional in our views of intelligence. I do good grades, you give me good university admissions. I get good grades, you give me a better job. I graduate on time, I go to a prestigious college, you give me something. We have to be transformational and want to make the world a better place. So let's make the world a better place, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Hocam. Thank you so much, Professor. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
If anyone have any questions, you could either write down the chat or you could raise your hands and wish to speak. So here we have one previous question from the forms we have collected. If you would want to listen, I could read it.
Okay.
The question is, do you think that the academia of developed countries is increasingly having a detached research agenda, which at best neglects the rest of the world?
Yeah, I don't know if it's increasing, but I think it's detached. I don't know the academic system in Turkey, of course, because I don't live there. But in many countries, I'm sorry to say that often the more narrow the work is, the more intensely focused it is on an intriguing but irrelevant problem to the world, the more credit it gets in academia. There are all these really serious problems in the world. And I think that people who go into academia are sometimes people who want an ivory tower. They want to escape those problems. You can't. That's what Ukraine shows us right now. You can't escape these problems. If you're in China and you're being confined to your apartment, you can't escape these problems. It doesn't matter how great your academic credentials are. It doesn't matter. COVID-19 is happy to strike anybody. So academics have to get real. If they have all these talents, instead of using them on problems that may be academically rewarding but real world irrelevant, we need not everyone, but more people concerned about how we can address the big problems facing the world and what should we do about them.
Ekin, you can go ahead and speak, maybe.
Firstly, thank you for this wonderful seminar. I wanted to ask that, in your opinion, is it really possible to create an culture-free IQ test?
No. The next question? No. You can't, because intelligence is always expressed in a cultural context. The idea was originally, there were some clever people in the early 20th century who thought that we could create a culture-free IQ test, say, by using geometric forms, because those weren't verbal and they seemed to be universal shapes. And then we discovered, first, the cultural differences on geometric tests were greater than cultural differences on verbal tests, because the whole geometric thing is mostly a product of technological and Western schooling. And second, just to emphasize that point, the Flynn effect, the increase in IQs by 30 points in the 20th century, was far greater on fluid tests, on so-called culture-free tests, than on crystallized or vocabulary and information tests. In other words, performance on what were thought to be culture-free tests was actually most affected by culture. If you grew up in rural Kenya or rural Alaska, you don't encounter that stuff. You know, you encounter fish, you encounter ice, you encounter hooks, but you don't encounter the kinds of shapes that populate Western, maybe Turkish, I don't know, elementary school and junior high school textbooks. So intelligence is expressed in a cultural setting. And just to emphasize that, you can see it today in one of our political parties. They're very smart people saying incredibly stupid things. They go to universities like Harvard and Yale and Princeton, and you can't believe the stupidities that come out of their mouth. It's like, did they have brain damage, or like, what happened here? You know, they kowtow to an authoritarian leader who's a narcissistic jackass. And what good is their intelligence if they're totally morally sold out and they'll say anything to make money and get reelected? I mean, like, in their adaptive intelligence at the individual level for advancing their own careers may be high, but collectively they just don't care. If everybody goes to hell, that's okay with them. We have a guy who wants to be Speaker of the House. He lies, he cheats, he's a total jackass, and he'll say anything to become Speaker of the House. So does it matter what his IQ is? I don't think so. I'm not mentioning anyone in particular, of course. Just my opinion. Others may disagree.
Thank you, John. We have one more question. Why do you think most developed countries ignore these facts, even these facts affect their future?
I think there are a lot of reasons that people ignore these facts. One is economic. Some of the things that need to be done don't have short-term economic benefits. They have long-term economic benefits, but most people don't think for the long term. A second is people get used to doing things a certain way. They get entrenched, so they don't change. A third is that often what's good for yourself individually in the short term is bad for people in the long term. But too many people think I'll be dead by then, or it's not my problem, or all I want is my big house in a gated community. What do I care about 30 years from now? So there are lots of reasons. And some of them may be good. You can understand why people don't want the economy to collapse, but you need to find a balance. You need to find a balance between the economy not collapsing and making a world that for your kids may be uninhabitable.
True. Thank you, Professor. And one more question. Do you think it is possible to teach skills like common sense or practical intelligence in formal education, or is it something you can only develop outside of schools?
It's possible to teach them in formal education if you use problems that are real world relevant. One of our states, which I won't say which one, it's in the South and it begins with an F, has just rejected a whole bunch of math textbooks, like 45 math texts. Why? Because they actually have real world content. And the governor, who went to Yale, I think, he went to a very good school. The governor thinks that you should learn math in math, not actually learn how to think about real world problems. So yeah, you could do it, but if the extreme right wing or sometimes the extreme left wing has its way, it's just not going to happen. They're so into their ideologies that they lose sight of what's best for kids.
Thank you, Professor. Ahsan Jalal, you can speak, unmute yourself.
Okay, so with regard to the first question, I think arrogance is a tremendous problem, but arrogance doesn't come from nowhere. And what is in the age of social media, I think what's happened is that arrogance, which used to be frowned on, has become rewarded. It's become a society where people spend more and more of their time in sort of this narcissistic pursuit of saying how great they are. So we've become kind of an advertising society. So yeah, I think arrogance is a huge problem. But it's one that if society keeps reinforcing it, it gets worse. What was the second question again? I'm sorry. Oh, got it. Okay. So I just had that conversation with my research group a few days ago. I have a group that meets once a week. It's actually meeting today. And, I think that individualism is part of the problem. Yeah, that if we only care about our own individual success, and in the short term, that's harmful. But what's become clear recently, and it should have been clear a long time ago, is that collectivism is not a solution to the problem. And the reason for that is if you get manipulative, narcissistic, psychopathic leaders who only care about themselves, what they try to do is manipulate the collectivism of their society for bad ends. So what is happening in some countries is the leaders cut off the internet to the outside, so people don't know what's going on outside. So number one is make sure that they don't know anything I don't want them to know. Number two is feed them a bunch of lies. Number three is appeal to their patriotism and their moral upbringing and their religiosity and so on. Feed them a whole fake world and appeal to their collectivism. You're doing this for the country, not for yourself. And most people are gullible enough to be taken in. And I'm not talking about a few, I'm talking about how many billion who will be taken in by cynical leaders who, seek control and only are interested in their own self-benefit. So neither individualism nor collectivism is a solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is critical, creative, wise, and commonsensical thinking. It's not enough to be collectivist because you could be manipulated by narcissistic psychopathic leaders, as people are being in much of the world today. And if you think I'm only pointing to other countries, we just had a president very recently who was exactly the same. So it's not just other countries. It's very much a threat right now in the United States. It was just a threat in France. And many people here are worried about our next election, our next presidential election, that it'll be manipulated by the autocrats and it'll be goodbye democracy for the United States. I think there's a good chance that that'll happen. So please don't think I'm only talking about other countries. The threat is right here, right now.
Thank you, Professor. We have a couple of more follow-up questions. Firstly, what kind of school system you would create that kids would be doing better according to their desires and intelligence? And how a person will know his abilities and intelligence if there is no simple tests? And how can I learn my intelligence and can improve individually?
Yeah. So with regard to the first question, I have a canary and I put him in another room, but he's singing anyway. I don't know if you can hear him. If you can, I'm sorry. I thought he would be quiet if I put him in another room. The kind of school that was supposed to be practical intelligence, and I guess it didn't quite work. It's terrible when someone low in practical intelligence tells you how to be practically intelligent. Next thing, I'll be selling you some kind of product. Okay. The kind of school is one that develops ethical leadership and active concerned citizenship in the sense that you use real world problems to develop creative, analytical, practical, and wise thinking. So there's so many problems to be solved in the world. Instead of taking the position of Florida that we don't want you to solve real world problems because you might actually discover we're lying to you and that we're just a bunch of moralistic jerks who are interested in ourselves, pretend moralistic jerks. Give kids real problems to it. Like, what can we do about climate change? What can we do about water pollution? What can we do about air pollution? What can we do about poverty that's all over the place? What can we do about hunger? What can we do about stupid wars started by autocrats who are insecure about their masculinity? I mean, those are the problems that people need to be dealing with. And it's fine to use school problems, but the problem is that you don't get that much transfer. Kids learn to solve these artificial problems, and the characteristics of the real world problems are almost entirely different from the characteristic of test problems. Problems we get in school, they have one correct answer. Often the answer is given. You're told what the